It was once a true style icon, sold worldwide during the Roaring '20s. These French hand-tailored socks and stockings were crafted in a traditional workshop, nestled in a small town. At its peak, the factory employed 1,700 people, but today nothing remains of its former glory. The site was suddenly abandoned, leaving behind a wealth of unsold products and expensive machinery. Join us as we uncover the fall of one of France's most renowned clothing firms. We started already on the terrain of the former factory park. Indeed, a factory park, which was quite common during the late 1800s. But today the park is long overgrown and full of spiderwebs. After a short while, we encountered the first building. It seemed we were in the factory's old storage building. This area is also the most modern addition, being one of the last investments on the site. But being empty and not having much interesting architecture, we wanted to head over to the older parts of the factory. The size of the halls shows the scale of the former production of what must have been one day.
Oh, moet je dit zien? Wat rare benen zijn dit.
After a lot of walking around, we realized this newer addition was completely separated from the older halls. So we had to try our luck in the basement. We came across more items, which was a good sign. Right here is the first real production hall. The hall was truly something special, being made out of wood. It shows you how old the halls are, with it being really uncommon to find these classic halls in factory buildings today. Besides this example of unique industrial architecture, the machines also piqued our interest. The machines were all from the Italian company specialized in making machines for the garment industry. The machine called Master was used to make high-quality adult-sized socks, while the machine called Junior 2 was used for children-sized socks. It really isn't often that you come across such machines, as they are pretty much the first thing to be sold off when production is shut down. Socks and stockings were the main products that made the company big and world-renowned. For its beginnings, we have to go back to the start of the 1800s. The production of clothing was largely something done on the side within some families, scattered around the town and throughout the countryside of France. But in this village, production was combined into one entity. The company provided the materials to the mostly at-home based production. After it was finished, the product was taken to be marketed and sold by the firm. This rather unique way of production became larger and larger, eventually becoming complete family-run workshops providing to the main brand. Just before the First World War, around 1,000 people were working for this firm. Further on, a larger, more modern hall could be found. This part probably dates back to the 1930s, when the factory was at its peak. With higher ceilings, it is in stark contrast to the previous parts, probably due to more mechanization being used for production. Shows the raw reality of the end of an era and the traces it leaves behind. We continued on to more of the production halls. The majority of the structure was also never modernized, which is always interesting to see. We entered a large, rather empty hall. Except for some vintage technology, not much could be found here. From old monitors to typewriters, it seemed that all of the old office equipment was never tossed out, but instead kept. It's always interesting to see these vintage pieces of machinery. After the Great War that ended in 1918, the company began to truly flourish. Traditional production methods were perfected, creating one of the best manufactured socks on the market. This, combined with an international marketing strategy, made this firm associated with quality and luxury during the 1920s. Eventually, it became one of the most well-known socks and stockings firms in the world, even inventing the first children's socks, for example. The family-run business was also a socially conscious one, providing housing, schooling, entertainment, and many other privileges. Times were truly booming for the firm and the area itself. Right now we are in yet another production hall. It was full of green vintage knitting machines. Bentley Comet machines were from Britain and were early automatic sock knitting machines. Rows of these old machines were located here, giving a true insight into the history of clothing production. These machines date back to the 1950s and are today becoming quite scarce. Some of the old products produced here were also found in this section. Next to the pink-colored production hall is yet another hall, this one being one of the oldest and smallest, dating back to when production was primarily hand-knitted. Without any machines, it instead held a ton of wet, never-sold socks. but also some that piqued our interest. Large carton boards with all kinds of different socks were disposed here. These represented the range of the products once produced by the firm. Hundreds were tossed out, rotting away. After the Second World War, competition from abroad increased, and the new reality of mass production also set in. The decentralized structure the firm was built on was seen as insufficient to sustain this changing world. So more and more of the production was centralized on this side, but the benefits the workers received and the other family-run workshops remained. The company eventually grew to 1,700 workers who were employed here. But during the 1980s, when the so-called textile crisis occurred, much of the European textile manufacturing disappeared at a rapid pace. Although this factory held its ground in the market, operations were shrinking. We reached the office block, which contained this grand staircase. Besides this, the majority of the offices were empty or scattered with loose paperwork. Offices are often the place to come across interesting artifacts and traces from the past. So we went up in search of these. The firm designed everything themselves, so some sort of design center should also be located here. In one of the attics we found an old archive full of magazines, but also mood boards. In the design process, these boards were made for inspiration purposes. It's often surreal to realize that all of this heritage of this over 200-year-old company is just rotting away. The upper floor was scattered with all sorts of socks, until we found probably the largest sock collection I've ever seen.
Wauw, wat een sokken.
Realizing there were also luxury socks, these were probably worth several thousand euros if ever sold. Our workshop combined with some heavy decay. This was the place where the maintenance workers kept the whole operation functioning. Next door, the beating heart of the facility was located. This diesel generator supplied electricity to the factory. In the past, it was common to have your own power supply in factories like these. It seemed to have been modernized in parts, judging by the more ornate upper sections of the control panels. Next door, a large workshop could be found, seemingly left completely with all of its contents inside. Once a place full of life, it is today an empty, dead space. By the end of the 1990s, the firm was in really bad financial weather, and the family workshops were halted, and in a truly unique tradition that had lasted for nearly 200 years. After 10 years, the factory closed down altogether, not due to bankruptcy, but due to a new owner. The firm was moved over to a more modern factory in Italy. Although it's always better to see the brand survive instead of disappear, the town tells the story of what happened in many French towns. With our only major workplace left, a hole in the identity of the town, once defined by such industry, was left behind. But on a more positive note, the factory's social policy gave the workers a sense of stability and wealth, which created a strong foundation for future generations to excel. There is also hope that this factory will be renovated. Let's hope this happens to preserve this unique piece of industrial history.